For 33 years, every single Wednesday, my wife left our house for her evening walk. Rain, snow, sickness, family emergencies. She never missed one. Not once. I never asked why. I trusted her. I loved her. And I thought I knew everything about the woman I'd spent 4 decades with. But after she passed away, I finally discovered the truth behind those walks. And what I found didn't just break my heart. It shattered everything I thought I knew about the love of my life. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 74 years old. I've lived a simple life, the kind most people wouldn't find particularly exciting. I own a couple of storage facilities on the south side of town. Nothing fancy, just metal buildings with padlocks where folks keep the stuff they don't have room for at home. I check the gates, collect the rent, fix broken hinges. It's honest work. It pays the bills. And for 43 years, it was enough to give me and my wife Margaret a comfortable, quiet life together. Margaret and I got married when we were young, back when gas was 30 cents a gallon and nobody locked their front doors. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We were just us. We had the kind of marriage people don't really talk about anymore. No big drama. No screaming fights. No affairs or betrayals. We were steady. We were solid. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our silent understandings. She'd make coffee every morning at 6. I'd read her the weather report while she buttered the toast. We'd sit together on the porch in the evenings, not always talking, just being. That's what real love looks like when the fireworks fade. It's comfortable, it's safe, it's home. Margaret was the kind of woman who kept everything organized. I mean everything. Our pantry looked like a grocery store, labels facing forward, cans arranged by size. She wrote lists for everything. Grocery lists, birthday lists, lists of things that needed fixing around the house. She had a calendar on the fridge with every doctor's appointment, every bill due date, every anniversary marked in her neat handwriting. She was gentle, too. The kind of gentle that made you feel safe just being around her. She never raised her voice, never slammed a door. When she was upset, she'd just get quiet, and I'd know. I'd know to give her space or to reach for her hand, depending on the kind of quiet it was. But Margaret was also private. She kept her feelings tucked away, stored neatly like those cans in the pantry. She didn't share everything with me, and honestly, I didn't push. I figured after 40 years together, we'd earned the right to have a few corners of our minds that stayed our own. I trusted her completely. There wasn't a doubt in my body. If you'd asked me back then if I knew my wife, I would have said yes without hesitation. I would have bet my life on it. Looking back now, I realize I was present in her life, but I was distracted. I was there physically, sitting across from her at dinner, lying next to her at night, but I wasn't always paying attention. I'd nod along when she talked about her day, but sometimes I'd be thinking about the leaky roof on Unit 7 or the tenant who hadn't paid in 2 months. I loved her deeply. Don't misunderstand me, but I took her for granted the way you take for granted that the sun will rise. You don't study it. You don't question it. You just assume it'll always be there. Then there was the walk. Every single Wednesday evening, like clockwork, Margaret would lace up her white sneakers, grab her light jacket, and head out the door. It started when we were in our 30s. I don't even remember how it began. One day she just said she wanted to take a walk to clear her head, and it became a thing. Every Wednesday, 6:30 in the evening. Rain, shine, snow, heat wave. It didn't matter. She never missed one, not for holidays, not for family gatherings, not even when she had the flu so bad she could barely stand. She'd still put on those sneakers and walk out that door. At first, I'd offer to join her. "Want some company?" I'd ask, smiling. She'd always decline, but she did it so sweetly that it never felt like rejection. "I love you, honey," she'd say, kissing my cheek. "But this is my time, just me and my thoughts." So I stopped asking. It became normal, just part of our life, like dinner at 6, like sleeping with the window cracked open. It was Margaret's Wednesday walk. That's just what she did. She never told me where she went. I never asked. I assumed she walked around the neighborhood. maybe down to the park a few blocks over. She'd be gone for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. She always came back calm, refreshed, like she'd hit some kind of reset button. Her shoulders would be relaxed. She'd smile easier. Sometimes she'd hum while she made tea. I loved seeing her like that. It made me feel like whatever stress she carried during the week, that walk washed it away. I never questioned it. Why would I? This wasn't some mystery from a True Stories crime podcast. This was my wife taking a walk, healthy, normal, good for her. I was proud of her consistency, actually. 43 years of marriage, and she never let herself get lazy. She kept moving, kept taking care of herself. That's admirable. But now, sitting here in the silence of this empty house, I realize how blind I was. There were signs, small things I didn't notice because I wasn't looking. She never changed her route, never switched the day, never invited a friend. It was always solo, always Wednesday, always the same time. If I suggested moving dinner to 7 on a Wednesday, she'd tense up. "Let's keep it at 6, honey," she'd say, her voice tight. I don't want to rush my walk. I thought she was just particular. Creatures of habit, right? But now I wonder. Now I see the pattern I missed. That walk wasn't just exercise. It wasn't just fresh air. It was something else entirely. Something she guarded. Something she protected with a fierce, quiet determination that I mistook for routine. And because I loved her, because I trusted her, I let it be. I gave her that space. I thought I was being a good husband, respecting her independence. But really, I was just asleep at the wheel. Margaret passed away 4 months ago. Heart failure. It was quick. One day she was fine, making her lists, planning her Wednesday walk. The next day, she collapsed in the kitchen, gone before the ambulance even arrived. I held her hand as the paramedics worked, but I already knew. The light in her eyes had gone out. My Margaret, my steady, gentle, organized Margaret, was gone. And with her, she took a secret I didn't even know existed. Over the years, that Wednesday walk became as much a part of our life as breathing. It was woven into the fabric of our marriage so tightly that I stopped seeing it as something separate. It was just what Margaret did, like how some people go to church on Sundays or play cards on Friday nights. Margaret walked on Wednesdays. Simple as that. I'd be sitting in my recliner, flipping through the newspaper or watching the evening news, and I'd hear her in the bedroom getting ready. The closet door would creak open. I'd hear the rustle of her jacket, the soft thud of her sneakers hitting the floor as she pulled them from the shelf. Then she'd appear in the living room doorway, her face already set with that quiet determination she always had on Wednesday evenings. "Heading out?" I'd ask, even though I already knew the answer. It was our little routine within the routine. "Yep," she'd say, zipping up her jacket. "Be back in an hour." Sometimes I'd tease her about it. "You training for a marathon or something?" I'd joke, grinning at her over the top of my newspaper. 40 years of walking. You should be able to circle the globe by now." She'd smile at that. A soft, gentle smile that reached her eyes. "Maybe I am," she'd say, playing along. "Maybe one day I'll just keep walking and end up in Paris." "Well, bring me back a croissant," I'd reply, and she'd laugh. That laugh. God, I miss that laugh. Other times, especially when the weather was bad, I'd offer to drive her somewhere. "It's pouring out there, Marg," I'd say, looking out the window at the sheets of rain coming down. "Let me drive you to the mall. You can walk the corridors where it's dry." "No, thank you, honey," she'd always say, pulling her hood up. I liked the fresh air. Rain never hurt anybody. And off she'd go, out into the storm, while I sat there shaking my head and smiling. That was Margaret, stubborn in the sweetest way possible. Once she set her mind to something, there was no changing it. When she came back, she'd always look peaceful, refreshed, like she'd been to a spa instead of trudging through the neighborhood in the dark. Her cheeks would be flushed from the exercise. Her eyes would be clear and calm. She'd pour herself a cup of tea, sit down next to me on the couch, and we'd watch whatever show was on. She never talked about the walk, never said where she went or what she thought about. and I never pushed. I figured if she wanted to share, she would. Looking back, I realized there were little things that should have made me curious. Not suspicious, just curious. But I was so used to the routine that I didn't notice the rigidity of it. Margaret was flexible about almost everything else in life. If I wanted to eat dinner at 7 instead of 6, she'd shrug and say fine. If I wanted to skip church one Sunday to go fishing, she'd pack me a lunch and kiss me goodbye. But the Wednesday walk, that was non-negotiable. I remember one year, we were invited to a family reunion. My brother was hosting it at his place upstate. Big event, cousins flying in from all over. The date fell on a Wednesday. When I told Margaret about it, her face went tight. "Can we leave Thursday morning instead?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Why wait?" I said. "If we leave Wednesday afternoon, we'll beat the traffic and get there in time for dinner." "I'd rather leave Thursday," she insisted, and there was something in her tone that told me not to argue. So I didn't. We left Thursday. I never thought much about it at the time. I just figured she didn't want to rush. But now I realize she wasn't willing to miss that walk. Not even for family. Another time, she got a terrible cold. I'm talking fever, chills, coughing so hard she could barely catch her breath. It was a Wednesday. I begged her to stay in bed. "Margaret, you can skip it this week," I said, feeling her forehead. "You're burning up. You need to rest." "I'll rest when I get back," she said, her voice hoarse. She pulled on her jacket over her pajamas, laced up those sneakers, and walked out the door. I watched her from the window, wobbling slightly as she made her way down the driveway. I was furious with her, worried sick. But she came back an hour later, looking exhausted but satisfied, like she'd accomplished something important. "Feel better?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Much," she said, and climbed into bed. I thought she was just being stubborn. I thought it was pride or routine or some need to prove she could still do it. I never imagined there was a reason, a real, serious reason she couldn't miss. She never changed her route either. I didn't know this for certain because I never followed her, of course, but I'd see her leave the same way every time. Down the driveway, turn left, disappear around the corner. She didn't mix it up. Didn't decide one week to go right instead of left. It was always the same direction. Always the same timing. 6:30 departure. Back by 8 at the latest, usually closer to 7:30. I used to think it was just her way of organizing her thoughts. Margaret loved order, she loved predictability. I figured the walk was her version of meditation, a way to sort through the week, plan for the days ahead, clear out the mental clutter. Plenty of people do that. Go for a run, take a drive, sit by a lake. Margaret walked. It made sense to me, and she always came back calm. That's the part that convinced me it was harmless. If something bad was happening during those walks, if she was stressed or upset or dealing with something dark, wouldn't I have seen it on her face? But no. She'd come through that door smiling, relaxed, at peace. She'd hang up her jacket, kick off her shoes, and settle into the evening like everything was right in the world. So I let it be. I gave her that space. I respected what I thought was her quiet time, her personal ritual. I thought I was being a good husband by not prying, by not hovering, by trusting her completely. And I did trust her, with everything I had, but trust can be a blindfold. It can keep you from seeing what's right in front of you, not because the person you trust is lying, but because you stop looking. You stop asking questions. You assume you know the whole story when really, you're only seeing the cover of the book. For 43 years, I watched my wife walk out that door every Wednesday. For 43 years, I smiled and waved and went back to my newspaper. For 43 years, I thought I understood, but I didn't understand anything. I didn't know where she was going. I didn't know who she was seeing. And I didn't know that every single step she took was carrying a weight I couldn't imagine. A burden so heavy it would have crushed me if I'd known. But I didn't know, and she never told me. And now she's gone. And the only thing I have left are questions that will never be answered and a silence that screams louder than any confession ever could. Life has a way of changing everything around you while you're busy living it. You blink, and suddenly your kids are grown. You turn around and the house feels emptier. You wake up one morning, and the person staring back at you in the mirror has more gray hair and deeper lines than you remember. That's what happened to us. Time moved, and we moved with it. But through it all, one thing stayed exactly the same. Margaret's Wednesday walk. We raised 2 kids in that house. A boy and a girl, Daniel and Susan. They grew up watching their mother lace up those white sneakers every Wednesday evening. When they were little, they'd ask if they could come along. "Mommy, can I walk with you?" Susan would beg, tugging on Margaret's jacket, and Margaret would kneel down, cup her little face, and say gently, "Not this time, sweetheart, but you can help Daddy make popcorn while I'm gone." The kids learned not to ask after a while. They just accepted it the same way I did. Daniel moved to Oregon after college, got himself a good job with a tech company, married a nice girl named Amy. They don't visit as often as I'd like, but we talk on the phone. Susan stayed closer. She's just 2 towns over, working as a nurse. She's got 3 kids of her own now, and Margaret loved being a grandmother. She'd babysit every Thursday, baking cookies with them, reading stories, spoiling them the way grandmas do. But Wednesday was off limits, even for the grandkids. I remember one time Susan called on a Tuesday night, frantic. Her youngest had the flu, and she had to work a double shift at the hospital. Her husband was out of town. She needed help. "Mom, I know it's your walking day tomorrow, but could you please watch Emma, just for a few hours? I'm desperate." Margaret's face tightened. I could see the struggle happening behind her eyes. She loved those kids more than anything. But after a long pause, she said, "I'm sorry, honey. I can't tomorrow. Can your mother-in-law do it? Or I can take her Thursday morning." Susan was hurt. I could hear it in her voice through the phone. "It's just a walk, Mom," she said, her tone sharper than usual. "Emma is sick. She needs her grandmother." "I know, sweetheart," Margaret said, her voice strained. "And I wish I could, but I just can't miss tomorrow. I promise I'll make it up to her." Susan ended up calling a neighbor. The tension hung in the air for weeks after that. I tried to smooth it over, telling Susan her mother had her reasons, even though I didn't really know what those reasons were. But it left a mark. It was the first time I realized Margaret's commitment to that walk went beyond routine. It was deeper than habit. It was something I didn't understand. Life threw us curveballs over the years, the way it does to everyone. My back started giving me trouble in my 50s. Spent 2 weeks flat on my back, popping painkillers and barely able to move. Margaret took care of me, brought me meals in bed, helped me to the bathroom. But come Wednesday evening, she still walked out that door. I remember lying there, helpless, thinking she might stay home that one time. But she didn't. She made sure I had everything I needed within reach, kissed my forehead, and left. I heard the front door close, and I just stared at the ceiling, wondering what could be so important. Then there was the year her mother died. Margaret's mom lived 3 states away, and we got the call on a Tuesday night. Massive stroke, gone within hours. Margaret was devastated. She cried in a way I'd never seen before, deep, shaking sobs that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. We booked flights for Thursday morning. The funeral was Saturday, but Wednesday came, and even with red, swollen eyes and a suitcase half packed on the bed, Margaret put on her jacket. "Marg, honey," I said gently, putting my hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go tonight. Stay home. Rest. We've got a long few days ahead." She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "I have to go, Robert," she whispered. "I have to." And she did. She walked out into the cold November evening, grieving and exhausted, and she was gone for an hour. When she came back, her face was wet. Whether from tears or the mist in the air, I couldn't tell. But she looked calmer, like whatever she'd done out there had given her the strength to face what was coming. Margaret had health scares too. A couple of years before she passed, she had a cancer scare. They found a lump during a routine checkup. We spent 2 agonizing weeks waiting for the biopsy results. both of us pretending to be calm while our insides were twisted into knots. I'd catch her staring out the window, her hand pressed against her chest, and I knew she was imagining the worst. I was too. But that Wednesday, even with the weight of the unknown pressing down on both of us, she walked. "Margaret, please," I said, my voice breaking a little. "Just this once. Stay with me." She looked at me with so much sadness in her eyes. "I wish I could explain it to you, Robert," she said softly, but I can't. Just trust me. Please." So I did. I trusted her, and she walked out that door while I sat there, alone with my fear, praying the test results would come back clean. They did, thank God. Benign. But I never forgot the look on her face that night. The conflict. The sorrow. Like she was being torn in two directions and could only choose one. Over the decades, I watched Margaret cancel things. She'd skip book club if she wasn't feeling well. She'd miss a neighbor's birthday party if the weather was too bad. She even skipped our own anniversary dinner one year because she had a migraine. But she never, not once, skipped that Wednesday walk. Blizzards, heat waves, thunderstorms, family emergencies, personal illness, it didn't matter. 6:30, every single Wednesday, she was out that door. I started to realize, slowly, quietly, that this wasn't just a walk. This was an obligation, a duty, something she carried that was bigger than comfort, bigger than convenience, maybe even bigger than love. And the weight of it was written in the lines around her eyes, in the way her shoulders sagged just a little when Wednesday afternoon rolled around. Sometimes I'd watch her get ready, and I'd see her hands tremble as she tied her shoelaces. I'd see her take a deep breath before standing up, like she was bracing herself for something, but she never said a word. And I never pushed. I was too afraid of what the answer might be. People talk about true stories of family secrets, the kind of hidden things that get buried so deep you forget they're even there. I used to think our life was an open book. No skeletons in the closet, no dark corners, just a simple, honest marriage built on trust and routine. But now I understand that some secrets aren't kept because of shame or betrayal. Some secrets are kept because the person carrying them loves you too much to burden you with the weight. Margaret carried something every Wednesday for 43 years. Something heavy. Something that required her presence, her commitment, her sacrifice. And she did it alone. She did it quietly. She did it without ever asking me for help or explanation or relief. I thought I was giving her freedom by not asking questions. I thought I was being respectful. But maybe what she needed was for me to see her, really see her, to notice the exhaustion, to recognize the burden, to ask the hard questions even if she couldn't answer them. Maybe she needed me to insist, to break through that wall of routine and force the truth into the light. But I didn't. I let her carry it alone. And now she's gone. And I'm standing here with 43 years of Wednesdays behind me, and I don't know where she went or why. All I know is that whatever she was doing, it mattered more than anything else in her life. And that terrifies me. Because if it mattered that much to her, how did I not see it? How did I live beside her for 4 decades and miss the most important thing about her? Margaret's diabetes had been manageable for years. She took her medication, watched her diet, checked her blood sugar religiously. It was just another part of the routine, like her Wednesday walks. But in her last year, things started to decline. Her numbers would spike without warning. She'd get dizzy spells. Her feet would go numb. The doctor adjusted her medications, warned her about complications, but Margaret just nodded and kept going like she always did. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until it was too late. She hid it well. That was Margaret's gift and her curse. She could smile through pain. She could organize chaos. She could make everything look fine even when it was falling apart. I'd ask her how she was feeling, and she'd say, "I'm fine, Robert, just a little tired." And I'd believe her because I wanted to believe her. It happened on a Thursday morning, not a Wednesday, Ironically, the day after her walk. I woke up around 6, reached over to her side of the bed, and felt the cold sheets. That wasn't unusual. Margaret was always up before me, making coffee, planning her day. But when I walked into the kitchen, she wasn't there. The coffee maker was cold. The lights were off. The house was silent in a way that made my chest tighten. I found her in the bathroom. She'd collapsed near the sink, still in her nightgown. Her skin was cold and pale. I dropped to my knees beside her, shaking her shoulder, calling her name. Margaret, Margaret, wake up. Please, wake up. But I already knew. You know that feeling when you know someone is gone before anyone tells you. That's what I felt. The stillness, the absence. Like her spirit had already left, and what remained was just an echo. I called 911. The paramedics came fast, but there was nothing they could do. Diabetic ketoacidosis, they said. Her blood sugar had spiked dangerously high, probably overnight. Her organs had shut down. It was quick. She didn't suffer. That's what they told me. I nodded like I understood, but I didn't hear anything after that. The world became muffled, like I was underwater. The funeral was small. Family, a few neighbors, people from church. Daniel flew in from Oregon. Susan handled most of the arrangements because I couldn't. I sat in the front pew at the service, staring at the closed casket, and I couldn't process that my Margaret was inside. 43 years, gone, just like that. No warning, no goodbye. Just an empty space where she used to be. People said the usual things. She's in a better place. At least she didn't suffer. Time heals all wounds. I smiled. I nodded. I thanked them for coming, but inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was drowning. The hardest part wasn't the funeral. It wasn't the flowers or the casseroles people dropped off or the sympathy cards that piled up on the kitchen counter. The hardest part was the silence. The house felt different without her. It felt bigger, emptier, like all the air had been sucked out of it. I'd walk into the kitchen expecting to see her at the stove. I'd hear a creak in the hallway and think she was coming downstairs. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach for her, only to find cold sheets and the crushing realization that she was gone. But nothing, and I mean nothing, was harder than the first Wednesday after she died. I'd made it through the funeral. I'd made it through the first weekend alone. But when Wednesday rolled around, it hit me like a freight train. 6:30 came, and I was sitting in my recliner, staring at the front door, waiting for her to come down the hallway in her jacket, waiting for the sound of her lacing up those white sneakers, waiting for her to kiss my cheek and say, "Be back in an hour." But she didn't come. The house stayed silent. 6:30 passed. 7 o'clock passed. The sun set, and the room grew dark, and I just sat there, frozen, staring at that door. It sounds crazy, but part of me expected her to walk through it. Part of me thought maybe this had all been a terrible dream and any second she'd appear, smiling, telling me she was sorry she was late. She never came. I realized then that Wednesday wasn't just her day. It was our day. It was the rhythm of our marriage. It was the one constant in 43 years of change. And now it was gone. Now Wednesday was just another empty day in an empty house. The day I used to take for granted became the hardest day of the week. Every Wednesday after that felt like a knife twisting in my chest, a reminder of what I'd lost, a reminder of the mystery I'd never solved. I started dreading Wednesdays. I'd wake up that morning with a weight on my chest. I'd move through the day in a fog. And when 6:30 came, I'd pour myself a glass of whiskey and sit in that recliner, torturing myself with memories. I'd remember her smile, her laugh, the way she'd hum when she came back from her walk. I'd replay 43 years of Wednesdays, searching for clues I'd missed, patterns I'd ignored. "Where did you go, Margaret?" I'd whisper into the empty room. "What were you doing all those years? Why didn't you tell me?" But the house never answered. The silence was absolute, and I was left with nothing but questions and regret. 1 month after the funeral, I was going through her things. I'd been avoiding it, Susan kept offering to help, but I wasn't ready. Finally, I forced myself to start. I went through her closet, donating clothes to charity. I sorted through her jewelry box, setting aside pieces for Susan and the grandkids. I found her collection of recipe cards, her stack of old birthday cards I'd given her over the years, her photo albums filled with pictures of the kids growing up. And then I found her calendar, the one she kept on the fridge with all her appointments and reminders written in her neat handwriting. I flipped through the months, looking at her life documented in blue ink. Doctor's appointments, grandkids, birthdays, grocery lists. And there, on every single Wednesday, was a small star. Just a star. No words, no explanation. Just a tiny hand-drawn star marking every Wednesday for the entire year. I flipped back through previous years. Same thing. Every Wednesday, a star. I went back further, finding old calendars she'd kept in a drawer. Year after year after year. Stars on every Wednesday, hundreds of them, thousands of them. A constellation of secrets I'd never noticed. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just routine. This was documentation. This was a record of something important. Something she needed to track. Something she never missed. And I'd lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, shared the same life, and never once asked what those stars meant. I sat down on the kitchen floor, surrounded by calendars and memories, and I cried. Not the dignified tears of a man mourning his wife. The ugly, choking sobs of a man realizing he'd failed to see her, failed to ask the right questions, failed to understand the woman he'd loved for 4 decades. The mystery of Margaret's Wednesday walks wasn't just about where she went. It was about who she was. There was an entire part of her life, an entire dimension of her soul that I'd never touched, and now she was gone, and I'd never know. I'd never understand. I'd live the rest of my life haunted by stars on a calendar and the sound of a door closing every Wednesday at 6:30. That's when I decided I couldn't live like this. I couldn't spend my remaining years drowning in questions. I had to know. I had to find out where she went, what she did, why it mattered so much, even if the truth hurt, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I needed to know. I owed her that much. And maybe, just maybe, I owed it to myself. 3 weeks after Margaret's funeral, something happened that changed everything. I was at the grocery store, the same one we'd shopped at for 20 years. I was standing in the cereal aisle, staring blankly at boxes I didn't need, when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, are you Margaret's husband?" I turned around. A woman stood there, maybe in her 50s, wearing scrubs like she'd just come from a hospital shift. Her eyes were kind but cautious. I didn't recognize her. "Yes," I said. "I'm Robert. Did you know Margaret?" The woman's face softened with genuine sadness. "I'm so sorry for your loss. She was such a wonderful woman. We're all devastated." She paused, her voice dropping. She meant so much to so many people. I felt a strange chill run down my spine. "I'm sorry. How did you know my wife?" The woman looked surprised, like I'd asked something obvious. "From Wednesday evenings, of course. She never missed. Not once in all those years." She reached out and squeezed my arm. "We don't know how we're going to manage without her." Before I could ask what she meant, her phone rang. She glanced at it, apologized, and hurried away, leaving me standing there with a box of cereal in my hand and 1,000 questions exploding in my mind. Wednesday evenings. So many people. All those years. What the hell was she talking about? I abandoned my cart right there in the aisle and walked out of the store. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. That woman knew Margaret. She knew about the Wednesday walks. And the way she said it, like it was common knowledge, like I should have known too, made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. We're all devastated. We don't know how we'll manage. Who was we? What was Margaret doing every Wednesday that involved other people? Why had she never mentioned it? By Thursday morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to retrace her steps. I was going to find out where my wife went every Wednesday for 43 years. That evening, at exactly 6:30 MR, I put on my jacket and walked out the front door. I went left, the same direction Margaret always went. My heart was hammering in my chest. I felt ridiculous, like a detective in a bad movie, but I kept walking. Down our street, past the Johnson's house with the barking dog, past the corner where the stop sign leaned slightly to the left. I walked for 10 minutes before the neighborhood started to change. The houses got smaller, the lawns less manicured. I passed a small elementary school, its playground empty and dark. Then a church with a faded sign. Then row after row of modest homes with chain-link fences and old cars in the driveways. I was about to turn back, thinking I'd gone the wrong way, when I saw it. A building at the end of the block. It was a single-story structure, plain brick, with a sign out front that read, Mercy Haven Community Center. I stopped. My chest tightened. This had to be it. This was where she came. I walked up to the building. The lights were on inside. I could see movement through the windows. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the door handle, terrified of what I might find inside. What if she'd been volunteering and never told me because she thought I'd feel guilty about her giving away her time? What if she'd had another family, another life? The thoughts spiraled, each one more absurd and painful than the last. I pushed the door open. The inside was warm and bright. There was a long hallway with scuffed linoleum floors and bulletin boards covered in flyers. I could hear voices coming from somewhere deeper in the building. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. I passed a room with tables and chairs, another with medical equipment, a small kitchen, and then I reached a larger room at the end of the hall. The door was propped open. I looked inside. There were about 15 people in the room, some sitting, some lying on cots, some in wheelchairs. They looked tired, sick, worn down by life. A few volunteers moved among them, handing out blankets, checking vitals, offering water. And then I saw something that made my breath catch. On the wall, hanging in a simple frame, was a photo. It was Margaret, smiling, surrounded by people. The plaque underneath read, In loving memory of Margaret Mitchell, volunteer of 43 years, our guardian angel, 43 years. A man approached me. He was older, maybe 80, using a walker. He looked at me with recognition in his eyes. You must be Robert, he said, his voice raspy but warm. Margaret talked about you all the time. We've been hoping you'd come. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him. She saved my life, he continued, his eyes misting over. Twice, actually. Once when I had a stroke right here in this room. She called the ambulance, stayed with me until they came. And again when I lost my home. She helped me find a place to stay, paid the first month's rent out of her own pocket. I'm not the only one. Everyone here has a story about Margaret. I looked around the room again, seeing it differently now. These weren't strangers. These were the people my wife had been caring for every single Wednesday for 4 decades. While I sat at home reading the newspaper, she was here, feeding the hungry, comforting the sick, giving hope to people who had nothing. A younger woman approached, the one from the grocery store. We tried to reach you after the funeral, she said gently, but we didn't have your number. We wanted to tell you what she meant to us. This place is closing down next month. Without Margaret's work, without her organization, we can't keep the doors open. She was the heart of this place. I felt my knees go weak. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Closing down, all these people, all this work, 43 years of love and sacrifice, and I'd known nothing about it. Why didn't she tell me? I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The old man with the walker smiled sadly. She said you worked so hard to provide for her. She didn't want you to feel like you had to carry this too. She said it was her gift to give. I looked at Margaret's photo on the wall, her smile, her eyes, the woman I thought I knew. And I realized I'd only known half of her, the half she let me see. The other half, The half that walked out the door every Wednesday belonged to these people, to this place, to a secret mission of mercy I'd been blind to for 43 years. I spent the next hour at Mercy Haven listening to stories. Each person in that room had a story about Margaret, how she'd helped them, how she'd saved them, how she'd shown up, week after week, year after year, when everyone else had given up on them. There was Maria, a woman in her 60s who'd been homeless for 3 years before Margaret found her sleeping behind a dumpster. Margaret brought her here, helped her get her medication, stayed with her through the withdrawals. "Your wife didn't just save my life," Maria said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "She gave me back my dignity."
She made me feel human again. There was James, a veteran with PTSD who'd lost everything after coming back from Iraq. Margaret sat with him every Wednesday night, just listening, never judging, never pitying, just being there. "She was the only person who didn't treat me like I was broken," he said, his voice cracking. "She treated me like I mattered." There was a young mother named Katie with 2 small children. Her husband had left. She'd lost her job. Margaret helped her find housing, bought groceries when the pantry was empty, babysat the kids so Katie could go to job interviews. "I don't know where we'd be without her," Katie whispered, holding her sleeping daughter. "Probably on the streets, or worse." Story after story, life after life. 43 years of quiet heroism that I'd known nothing about. And as I listened, something inside me started to break. Not in a bad way. In a way that cracked open something I'd been holding too tight for too long. The woman in scrubs, whose name I learned was Diane, pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know," she said gently. "Margaret didn't just volunteer here. She funded this place. When the city cut our budget 15 years ago, we were going to close. Margaret stepped in. She paid the rent. She paid for supplies. She covered the utilities, out of her own pocket. Every single month, my legs went weak. I had to sit down. "How much?" I whispered. "About $800 a month," Diane said. "Sometimes more when we had emergencies." She never wanted credit. She never wanted recognition. She just wanted to make sure this place stayed open. She said these people deserved a sanctuary, a place where they could be safe. $800. For 15 years. I did the math in my head. That was over $140,000. Money that came from our account. Money I'd never questioned because Margaret handled the finances. Money I'd assumed went to groceries and bills and her book club. But it didn't. It went here. To people who needed it more than we did. And suddenly, so many things made sense. The way she'd clip coupons so carefully. The way she'd buy generic brands instead of name brands. The way she'd insist we didn't need a new car when mine was running fine. The way she'd mend clothes instead of buying new ones. I'd thought she was just frugal. But she wasn't being cheap. She was being sacrificial. Every dollar she saved on us was a dollar she could give to them. "She made me promise not to tell you," Diane continued, her voice thick with emotion. "She said you worked so hard for your money. She didn't want you to feel like she was wasting it." "But Robert, she wasn't wasting anything. She was investing in people nobody else would invest in. She was building hope where there was none." I looked around the room again, at the cots, at the medical supplies, at the people who were eating warm meals and sleeping under clean blankets, people who had been invisible to the rest of the world, people society had forgotten, and my Margaret had seen them, every single one of them. She'd walked out of our comfortable house every Wednesday evening and walked into their pain, their brokenness, their desperate need. She didn't walk to escape me. She walked to save them. The old man with the walker sat down next to me. His name was Albert. "Your wife used to say something to us," he said, his voice trembling. "Every Wednesday, before she left, she'd stand right where you're sitting, and she'd say, 'I'll see you next week, I promise.' And she always kept that promise. Rain, snow, sickness, it didn't matter. She'd show up. Do you know what that meant to people like us? People who've been abandoned and forgotten. To have someone promise to come back and actually do it, week after week, year after year. That wasn't just volunteering, Robert. That was love. Pure, selfless, unconditional love. I broke, right there in that room full of strangers who weren't strangers at all. They were my wife's family. Her other family. The family she'd chosen to serve while I sat at home thinking I was taking care of her. I put my head in my hands and I sobbed. Deep, choking sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed inside me. All those years, I'd thought I was the provider. I'd thought I was the one carrying our family. I'd owned those storage units, collected the rent, paid the mortgage, put food on the table. I'd been proud of that.
Proud of being a good husband who took care of his wife. But Margaret didn't need me to take care of her. She needed me to see her, to understand that while I was building a comfortable life for us, she was building lifelines for people who were drowning. And I'd missed it. I'd missed all of it. 43 years of walking right past the most beautiful thing about the woman I loved. I'd seen the sneakers and the jacket and the Wednesday routine, but I'd never seen the heart behind it. The massive, boundless, sacrificial heart that couldn't pass by suffering without stopping to help. Diane knelt down in front of me. "She loved you so much, Robert," she said softly. "She talked about you all the time, about how hard you worked, about how good you were to her, about how you gave her the freedom to do this work without questioning her. She said that was your gift to her, trust, and that trust allowed her to be who she really was. But I didn't give her trust, I thought. I gave her neglect. I gave her indifference dressed up as respect. If I'd really trusted her, I would have asked, I would have cared enough to know. I would have walked beside her instead of letting her walk alone. "We're closing next month," Diane said, standing up. "Without Margaret's support, we can't keep going. We've tried to find other funding, but it's not enough. These people will have nowhere to go, no one to help them. Margaret's legacy will end." I looked at the faces in that room, faces Margaret had loved, faces she'd served, faces that were about to lose the only safe place they'd ever known. And I realized something that hit me like a freight train. This wasn't over. Margaret's work wasn't finished. She'd left it unfinished because death doesn't wait for neat endings. But I was still here. I was still breathing. And I'd spent 43 years being blind. But I could see now. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my voice was steady. "It's not ending," I said. "I'll take over the rent, the utilities, whatever it costs. This place stays open." Diane's eyes went wide. "Robert, that's $800 a month. You can't." "Yes, I can," I said firmly. "I own those storage units free and clear. They bring in enough." Margaret found a way to make it work for 15 years while keeping me in the dark. I think I can figure it out now that I know. I looked around at the faces staring at me with hope and disbelief. "She made you a promise. I'll see you next week." Well, I'm making that same promise now. I'll see you next week, and the week after, and every week until I'm in the ground next to her. The room erupted, people crying, people hugging. Albert grabbed my hand with both of his and squeezed it so tight I thought my bones would break. "Thank you," he kept saying. "Thank you, thank you." But I was the one who needed to say thank you. "Thank you, Margaret, for showing me what real love looks like. Thank you for carrying this alone so I wouldn't have to. Thank you for being so much more than I ever deserved." Every Wednesday now, at exactly 6:30, I put on my jacket and walk out that front door. I turn left, just like Margaret did for 43 years, and I walk to Mercy Haven. I don't do the medical work like she did. I'm not trained for that, but I sit with people. I listen to their stories. I make sure the lights stay on and the doors stay open. Sometimes I bring soup. Sometimes I just bring my presence. And every single time I walk through that door, I feel her with me. I feel her pride. I feel her love. The walk isn't just mine anymore. It's ours. I'm finishing what she started, one Wednesday at a time, honoring the woman who taught me that the greatest love doesn't make noise. It just shows up. Some loves don't need grand gestures or loud declarations. They don't need recognition or applause. They just need consistency. They just need someone willing to lace up their shoes every single week and walk into the broken places of the world with open hands and a servant's heart. Margaret did that for 43 years while I sat at home thinking I knew her. But now I know the truth. Now I carry her legacy forward. If this story touched your heart, if you know someone who carries a burden in silence, someone who sacrifices without asking for anything in return, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Share this story in the comments. Tell us about the quiet heroes in your life, because their stories deserve to be heard, and their love deserves to be honored. I'll see you in the next one.